Driven by the raw need to put food on the table, this man had no choice but to leave everything behind. This wasn't some grand adventure. It was a desperate escape because staying there felt like burying himself alive. In a place like this, if you don't know how to suck up to the powerful, money will never find its way into your pocket. So, he chose the life of an exile, carrying nothing but his hardships and a burning ambition to survive at any cost. Before he departed, he gave his foster sister one crucial instruction. If anything, and he meant anything, went wrong, she had to send him an email. But in a cruel twist of fate, on the very day his foster mother met with disaster, he accidentally missed that desperate plea for help. Now, consumed by a mountain of regret, he has returned with only one goal left, to rain down vengeance for his foster mother. Back in his youth, Eun-young was a legend on the streets, known for a pair of fists that no one could match. It was that same reckless streak that made him a regular at the juvenile detention center. Every time he was hauled away, his cold stare and don't-give-a-damn attitude commanded both fear and respect. It was exactly that aura that caught the eye of a notorious local mob boss. One day, the moment Eun-young was released, the boss appeared right in front of him. In the gravelly voice of a man who had seen it all, he said, "If you've got nowhere to go, come find me." Those words echoed in Eun-young's mind like a siren song from the darkness. Despite growing up in soul-crushing poverty, he had always tried his best to stay on the right side of the law. But when he finally reunited with his sister after years apart, and saw his scrawny nephew huddled over a tattered book under the flicker of a dim light, Eun-young realized he was out of options. He wanted to rewrite his family's destiny. He wanted a different future for that boy, a life that wasn't crushed under the suffocating weight of poverty. Eun-young understood that if he had to dive into the underworld to buy that chance, so be it. As long as his family escaped their misery, it didn't matter what kind of man he became. And so, he officially crossed the line and joined the mob. 20 years have passed. The city has transformed, and Eun-young is now a hardened man with eyes as cold as steel. He was running the business as usual, but today wouldn't be easy. The opposition fought back so violently that they even brought out excavators for the showdown. Under a sky choked with dust and smoke, Eun-young silently led his crew, determined to finish the mission even as sweat and tears blurred his vision. Word of this fierce resistance soon reached Chairman In-ju, the king of the district. He was a man famous for never showing mercy to anyone who dared challenge his authority. But instead of punishing Eun-young, he was impressed by a man who knew how to not only stand his ground but thrive in the chaos. Just like that, Eun-young was promoted, becoming In-ju's most trusted right-hand man. With money pouring in like a flood, his family's life was flipped upside down. Their crumbling shack was replaced by a luxury high-rise in the heart of the city. His sister, the woman who spent years serving others, was now the proud owner of her own tea house. And his nephew, Tae-chun, the boy who once dreamed with clear, innocent eyes, had successfully fought his way to becoming a prosecutor. But in a world fueled by power and dirty politics, talent isn't always enough. When the door to the Special Investigations chief position was slammed shut in his face, Tae-chun felt the sting of an invisible wall for the first time in his life. In that moment, a dangerous thought sparked in his mind. Maybe it was time to stop waiting for power to be handed to him and time to start seizing it. Not long after, opportunity finally knocked. An anonymous file landed on Tae-chun's desk, potentially opening the path to the promotion he'd been denied for so long. Inside was a secret dossier on a solar energy company, filled with a maze of cryptic numbers and statistics that hinted at something much darker. What caught Tae-chun's eye more than anything else was a single name: Jumbo. He was a massive social media influencer, but more importantly, he was a man rumored to have deep, shady ties to the political elite. To crack the code of those confusing numbers in the dossier, Tae-chun sought out Sang-il, a former veteran of the Special Investigations Unit. Years ago, Sang-il had actually pushed for an investigation into Jumbo, but his proposal was ruthlessly shut down by a man named Hwang. Now that Hwang himself was linked to the case, Tae-chun realized that what he held in his hands wasn't just a file, it was the fuse for a massive, world-shaking scandal. Sang-il looked at the figures and let out a long sigh. He explained that while the numbers looked meaningless, veteran players in the underground financial world used this specific type of encryption to hide the trail of dirty money. Hearing this, Tae-chun froze as a realization hit him. There was only one person on Earth capable of decoding data this complex: his uncle, Eun-young. Back then, Eun-young was working for a massive private lending firm owned by the kingpin In-ju. With a God-given talent for numbers and a freakish intuition for finance, he had become the boss's most lethal asset. With his uncle's secret help, Tae-chun quickly decoded the entire document, and the results were staggering. The entire solar energy investment system was nothing but a massive front for a high-level money laundering ring. Seizing the moment, Tae-chun played a masterstroke. He exploited the internal friction between Young-soo and Hwang to launch a counterattack. Immediately after, he issued an arrest warrant for Jumbo, sending shockwaves through the media. This high-profile bust turned Tae-chun into an overnight celebrity in the legal world. Headlines and news reports everywhere were calling him the rising star and the future of the justice system. But amidst the thunderous applause and the flashing cameras, Tae-chun's eyes remained ice-cold. He hadn't forgotten his silent oath. He was going to take Hwang down no matter what, and then claim a seat in the Special Investigations Unit, the place where real power resides. Meanwhile, halfway across the world in the vast, endless plains of Mongolia, Eun-yong was living a quiet life among wild horses. But the peace didn't last. When his subordinates brought him news that the man his nephew was investigating was none other than Inju, Eun-yong's expression darkened. He had no idea that while he was away from Korea, his only savior, the man who once saved his life, Yoon, had been destroyed by those very people. When he learned that Yoon's daughter, Junkyung, was also being summoned for investigation, it all clicked. The anonymous file Tae-chun received? She was the one who sent it. Now, as every blade is drawn against Inju, the man who once lived in the shadows is finally making his move. A fire of vengeance, buried for 20 years, has been reignited. A private jet worth tens of millions of dollars quietly took off from Mongolia, heading for Seoul. This time, he wasn't returning for business. He was returning to collect a debt that could only be paid in blood. Looking at the news of his mentors passing on the screen, Eun-yong's heart felt like lead. In that heavy silence, a memory from when he was 18 years old came rushing back. He was on a train back to the city, wanting nothing more than to live a quiet life and stay out of trouble. But fate had other plans. In the middle of a crowded train car, a group of thugs began harassing a beautiful young woman. First, Eun-yong tried to look away. He didn't want to fight. He didn't want to be dragged back into the darkness. But seeing the sheer terror in the girl's eyes sparked something unrecognizable inside him. Suddenly, another girl stepped forward. She snatched the umbrella right out of Eun-yong's hand and lunged toward the massive thug. She stood her ground, fearless, holding that umbrella high like a makeshift weapon, ready to take on the world. That scene made Eun-yong instinctively bolt upright. When the thug's reinforcements started pouring in from the next car, he knew the girl was in serious trouble. Without a second's hesitation, Eun-yong stepped in, shielding her from the mob. He played it cool at first, casually muttering that he just needed to get to the restroom, before suddenly letting out a roar, signaling the girl to fight back. In a heartbeat, the entire train car descended into pure chaos. Shouts, heavy footsteps, and the sharp crack of clubs hitting bone echoed through the air. In the middle of that frantic crowd, two strangers became a well-oiled machine, fighting side by side as if they'd known each other for a lifetime. When the dust finally settled, both were hauled off by the police for disturbing the peace. Not long after, the girl's mother arrived. Her name was Yoon, a woman who carried herself with a quiet, unshakable dignity. After hearing what happened, she didn't scold them. Instead, she looked at Eun-yong with a gaze full of genuine gratitude. Using her status, she personally posted bail for both of them. During the meal that followed, Yoon gently asked for his name. When Eun-yong answered timidly, she simply smiled and told him she knew he was a man who stood up to fight alongside her daughter. It was a simple sentence, but it acted like a crack in Eun-yong's hardened exterior. From that day on, his life took a radical turn. Yoon didn't just open her home to him. She gave him a rare sense of respect, something no one had ever shown him before. Eun-yong once asked her, bewildered, if she wasn't afraid to let a former juvenile delinquent into her house. Yoon just softly replied, "You're one of our comrades." That night, Eun-yong fell into the deepest sleep of his life. It was the first time his dreams weren't haunted by nightmares. From then on, he became a regular visitor, always bringing small gifts for Yoon. Even as fate later dragged him back into being a mob henchman, and even as he drowned in the tears and blood of the underworld, Yoon remained the only light in his heart. She was closer to him than his own blood. It was her influence that eventually gave him the strength to try to sever his ties with a life of crime. He decided to start over, founding his own company with the dream of building a clean, honest life. Yoon didn't just support him with her faith. She gave him the opportunity of a lifetime by making him a supplier for her conglomerate, Bluenet. Tragically, Eun-yong's joy was short-lived. Inju, the shark of the underworld, quickly caught wind of his plans. During Eun-yong's final mission, the old man secretly planted an ambush and seized every single share of Eun-yong's company. But Inju didn't stop there. He issued a bone-chilling warning. If Eun-yong ever tried to make a single cent in that district again, his sister would pay the ultimate price with a gruesome end. Just as Inju's thugs were about to finish him off, Eun-yong grabbed one final chance at life. Thanks to an old friend who turned a blind eye at the last second, he leaped onto a moving truck and escaped the jaws of death by a hair's breadth. Surmounting that brush with fate only made him harder. He realized that this world belongs only to the strong. If he wanted to survive, he had to become more powerful than anyone else. Later, when he saw Yoon's company stock spiraling into a freefall, he immediately rushed to find her. As he laid out the entire story, the horrific truth finally began to sink in. Eun-young knew In-ju's ruthless playbook inside out. The old man's next move was definitely to short-sell Yoon's company into oblivion. But where there is danger, there is opportunity, and Eun-young knew this was the moment to strike back. Yoon realized that Eun-young's plan involved stock manipulation, and she still wanted to solve things the legal way. However, Eun-young stood his ground. He told her that on this financial battlefield, the rules are just a game for fools. To win, you have to use the tactics of the strong. With her silent backing, Eun-young immediately rented out a vacant internet cafe and gathered every single person who had ever been a bitter rival of In-ju. And just like that, a battle of the century in the digital age officially ignited. In that room, bathed in the flickering glow of computer screens, the atmosphere was electric. Prices were shouted out second by second as they synchronized their trades, launching a full-scale assault on the market. Like a master conductor leading an electronic symphony, Eun-young orchestrated his team with perfect rhythm, sending BlueNet's stock prices skyrocketing. As the screens flashed a frantic red, In-ju completely lost his cool. Gritting his teeth, he ordered his subordinates to pump in more capital at any cost. But what he didn't realize was that this time, he was the one being hunted in a financial trap laid by Eun-young. With everything moving in their favor, Eun-young went to see Yoon, hoping to double down and put even more pressure on In-ju. Yoon, with the sharp intuition of a veteran entrepreneur, quickly realized that behind In-ju stood a massive, shadowy financial conglomerate. She knew her current shares were enough to drive the price even higher, but she questioned whether Eun-young could truly withstand the crushing weight of the pressure that was about to come. Eun-young had absolute confidence in himself. To him, this was the era of the internet where information is the deadliest weapon. He believed that as long as they released real, positive news, the tide of public opinion would naturally turn in their favor. He didn't just trust Yoon's capability, he trusted in BlueNet's core values, integrity and transparency. The very next day, news broke that BlueNet had been granted a patent for a new line of chips in the U.S., and it sent shockwaves through the entire market. Yoon appeared before the press, glowing with confidence and lighting up the hall. Watching her on screen, In-ju's face turned purple with rage. Before his anger could even boil over, his phone rang. It was a major overseas partner, coldly demanding compensation for their losses. They threatened that if he didn't pay up, they would show his conglomerate exactly what discipline looked like. Just like that, Eun-young's plan was a resounding success. Not only did he crush his old enemy, but he also paid his team double their salary, leaving them cheering in the glow of victory. Meanwhile, In-ju was fuming. He sought out an old friend in the prosecutor's office, hoping to use his influence to launch an investigation and frame Eun-young and his sister for stock manipulation. While they talked, In-ju acted all friendly, sliding a box of pastries across the table. A classic disguise for a bribe. But the prosecutor just gave a cold smirk, showing zero interest. Then, he called in another guest. In-ju was completely blindsided when the man who walked through the door was none other than Eun-young, his former protege. In that moment, the air in the room seemed to freeze. You see, Eun-young was famous for having a superhuman memory for numbers. Because of that, he had memorized every single one of In-ju's bribery accounts from years ago. The prosecutor, seeing which way the wind was blowing, immediately chose to stay out of it and let the teacher and student settle their own score. In-ju tried to keep his cool, claiming he had even higher-level connections and nothing to fear. But Eun-young just smiled coldly. He made it clear, every single account used for their dirty money was burned into his memory. If he so much as opened his mouth, the entire system would collapse. Faced with a version of Eun-young that was this calm and terrifying, In-ju started to panic. Finally, Eun-young laid out a deal to keep the peace one last time. He would leave Korea within 1 week and stop interfering with In-ju's business. But there was one condition. In-ju must never, under any circumstances, touch his family. As he walked out of that smoke-filled room of schemes, Eun-young thought to himself, In-ju, you really shouldn't have messed with my family. Meanwhile, a beautiful girl is weaving through the crowd. Her sharp eyes scan every passerby, but her true goal is anything but simple, because she's busy picking pockets and stealing from everyone in sight. No one suspected that the mountain of internal documents handed to Tae-chun was actually leaked by her. Armed with this goldmine of information, Tae-chun immediately launched a massive sting operation, arresting online shills and determined to track down the mysterious GM company. To go even deeper, he secured a special permit and convinced Sang-il, a legendary former member of the Special Investigations Unit, to come out of retirement and join the hunt. Tae-chun's raw sincerity and hunger for justice finally won the veteran over. But over lunch, Sang-il dropped a truth bomb that left Tae-chun frozen in his tracks for 5 long seconds. He said, A prosecutor's true power doesn't lie in their ability to indict. It lies in their power to choose not to indict. Those words, soaked in years of bitterness, stripped away the mask of the profession Tae-chun had spent his life idolizing. Almost immediately after, Tae-chun was summoned by his superior, Young-soo. The boss coldly ordered him to shut down the GM investigation. The excuse? Chang-hyun, a former local prosecutor turned GM spokesperson, had just treated him to a lavish, high-end lunch. But it didn't stop there. Chang-hyun had also invited Hwang, the powerhouse from Special Investigations. Through Chang-hyun's calculated mediation, the two chiefs quickly shook hands. The order was final. The investigation dies today. Tae-chun was devastated. He had always believed that being a prosecutor was the one job where your background didn't matter, where justice alone was enough to stand on. But when his ideals collided with the brick wall of reality, his world shattered. No matter how hard he fought, he couldn't seem to move the needle in this rigged system. Meanwhile, in another part of the city, the mysterious girl received word from her contacts. The GM investigation was officially buried, and Chang-hyun was walking away scot-free. However, this was exactly what she expected. It turned out the rot within the prosecutor's office hadn't changed a bit over the years. This girl was Jun Kyung, the daughter of Yoon, the same woman who had been Eun Young's savior. Fueled by a quiet, burning rage, Jun Kyung had been shadow-tracking Inju, and she discovered that GM was just one small gear in the massive, corrupt machine he had built. The next day, at a high-profile campaign rally for Chang-hyun, Inju showed up to flash his support. But in the middle of Chang-hyun's fiery speech, a man suddenly stormed the stage, screaming accusations of market manipulation. Before anyone could blink, the man doused himself in gasoline and transformed into a human torch, burning brightly in front of the screaming crowd. With the scandal exploding, Young-soo scrambled to save face and ordered Tae-chun to investigate GM immediately. The public outcry was too loud to ignore. They had to act before they were swallowed by it. Tae-chun led a raid on GM's headquarters, but the upper hand was already gone. The evidence seemed to have vanished. At the same time, while Jun Kyung was performing a memorial service for her mother, she was abruptly picked up by the Special Investigations Unit. Everyone knew this was Hwang's move. After the shocking self-immolation, Chang-hyun was in the middle of a PR nightmare. To quiet the storm, Hwang decided to pin everything on a fall guy, Director Kim. He quickly chalked the whole thing up to internal corruption to close the case, while simultaneously framing Jun Kyung for the theft of trade secrets. Inside a dimly lit interrogation room, Jun Kyung sat silently before a one-way mirror, but she could feel the cold, piercing stare from behind the glass. Suddenly, the door was kicked open. A squad of military personnel stormed in. The room fell into a confused silence as they read the orders. According to Article 44 of the Military Court Act, jurisdiction over military personnel belongs solely to the army. In that moment, Jun Kyung stood up, composed, powerful, and shrouded in a mystery that left everyone in the room stunned. It was clear that whatever history existed between her and Hwang was far more complicated than anyone knew. Meanwhile, in another room, Director Kim remained tight-lipped under Tae-chun's questioning, acting with an arrogant swagger, demanding food and drinks as if he were the one holding all the cards. Right then, Tae-chun's phone rings. It's an urgent summons from the top. His superiors want a report immediately. Little did he know, a massive tidal wave was brewing behind that single phone call. It turns out the man who called him was Hwang, the powerhouse from the Special Investigations Unit. When they meet, Hwang is all smiles. A total 180 from what you'd expect. He showers Tae-chun with non-stop praise before smoothly dropping an invitation to join his elite team. Hwang knew exactly what he was doing. Even though Tae-chun was young, he was the one leading this specific investigation. Hwang realized that if he wanted to avoid any headaches down the road, bringing this rising star over to his side was the smartest chess move he could make. But right in the middle of their talk, Hwang's phone rings. He offers a polite smile, apologizes, and lets Tae-chun head out first. On the other end of that line is Inju, the true puppet master behind every scheme. He issues a cold order. Acquire GM by delisting the company immediately. The goal is simple: incinerate every scrap of illegal evidence. To a man like Inju, Chang-hyun was now nothing more than a pawn, ready to be sacrificed at a moment's notice. Meanwhile, Eun Young just got the news. He saw through Inju's plot instantly. The old man wanted to use this crisis to scrub the record of his stock manipulation while giving the prosecutor's office the perfect excuse to protect them. As a former local prosecutor, Chang-hyun was the vital link. He was the guy providing the connections and the political muscle for Inju's crew. That meant if Eun Young wanted to take down Inju, his first move had to be eliminating Chang-hyun. While combing through the files, Eun Young noticed a red flag. Since April, GM hadn't made a single shady transaction in that specific district. He realized this was the lead he needed. Years ago, when he was just starting out, it was the power players in that district who helped him. Especially Sister Kim, the only person who had the guts to put her faith in him back then. It's crazy how a connection from years ago would plant the seeds for such a brutal financial war today. But this time, driven by nothing but vengeance, Eun-young decided to be heartless. He wiped out all the small fry associates, clearing the path for his massive counterattack. After securing the crucial documents, Eun-young prepared to leave, but a friend arranged a secret rendezvous. There, in the middle of a torrential downpour, two brothers in arms who hadn't seen each other in years finally stood face to face. It was Major Park, using her military status to stay out of the prosecutor's office's reach. A sign that a much bigger drama was about to unfold. Eun-young's mind flashed back to the day he left Korea. He remembered Jun Kyung's emotional plea for him to stay, and his own painful confession. That compared to a life in exile, staying in this country was far more difficult. In a place where you have to suck up to the powerful just to make a dime. He knew he couldn't wait around for the day Jun Kyung finally became a prosecutor. He had given her a pen back then, a symbol of his belief in justice, hoping she would use it to sign indictments against the truly wicked. Before leaving, he had made her promise. If anything happens, you must send me an email. But in a cruel twist of fate, on the very day Yoon met her disaster, Eun-young had accidentally missed that one desperate plea for help. Returning to that familiar old house, a place overflowing with memories, Eun-young stood in silence, taking in every corner. In the study, the walls were covered with Jun Kyung's obsessive investigation notes on Inju. His eyes stopped on the bed where Jun Kyung used to sleep, and his heart felt like it was breaking. He realized then that this fight wasn't just Jun Kyung's war anymore. She was his family. More than that, they were comrades bound by a shared grudge and an unfinished promise. Jun Kyung remembered the day her mother met her fate. Her mother had gone to the prosecutor's office to testify as a witness, but she was snatched by special agents the moment she arrived. When Jun Kyung got the news, she rushed to find Hwang, but she was coldly informed that it was an order from the top. They were accusing her mother of bribing Hwang himself. To make matters even more complicated, it turned out that back in their university days, Jun Kyung and Hwang were actually lovers. Hwang knew that if he leaked their old photos, her mother would be instantly swallowed by a vicious public scandal. Jun Kyung lashed out, accusing Hwang of a blatant abuse of power. But Hwang, ever the manipulator, played his cards coldly. He told her that if they decided to dig deep, there was no way her mother would escape. Only you can save her, he whispered, so don't be reckless. Watching her mother suffer, Jun Kyung finally saw the truth. The Special Investigations Unit she had always dreamed of was nothing more than a den of corrupt dealers. They used their power to investigate like a weapon, offering deals that were impossible to refuse. To save her mother, Jun Kyung was forced to accept his terms. Under Hwang's orders, she fabricated evidence to frame Minister Sun, successfully forcing him to withdraw from the election. Hwang kept his word and dropped the charges against her mother. But when Jun Kyung saw Minister Sun appear at the trial, she got a bad feeling. Sure enough, her mother and the minister stepped out to announce to the media that they would expose the truth about the prosecution's abuse of power. It was exactly the kind of brave, noble move her mother was known for. But Hwang was 10 steps ahead. Just as Jun Kyung was about to resign, she was hauled in for questioning by Internal Affairs. The charge? Fabricating evidence. Hwang was now using Jun Kyung's entire future as a hostage to force her mother to submit. In a final, desperate move, Jun Kyung revealed the last recording her mother had sent to Minister Sun. On that night of the torrential rain, her mother had decided to shoulder all the guilt alone, hoping to earn the minister's forgiveness. In that same downpour, she stepped on the gas and drove her car into the abyss, ending her own life to end the nightmare. While Hwang and his crew planned to use Director Kim as a fall guy to bury the case, Eun-young had already gathered enough evidence to burn them down. However, he knew the law was a dead end. In Korea, what's the most important thing for a prosecutor? It's the media spotlight. That's the real secret to a fast-track promotion. When Tae-chun saw that Director Kim's defense was being handled by lawyer Lee, a man notorious for turning black into white, he knew exactly what was happening. Inju was trying to whitewash the GM company so they could pull their capital out clean. This was lawyer Lee's specialty. But right now, the biggest thorn in their side was the stubborn Tae-chun, who was determined to dig up the truth about Director Kim. Inju assured his team that his son-in-law, Hwang, would step in to handle the mess. This move put Tae-chun in a corner. Neither Director Kim nor Jumbo would break, because they were both under Inju's thumb and had zero reason to betray him. When Sang-il heard that Tae-chun had gone to meet Hwang at the Special Investigations Unit, he gave him a stark warning. Hwang never breaks a promise. If he made a deal, he'd keep it. Tae-chun had to think long and hard about the path he was choosing. Soon enough, Hwang summoned him again. Walking into the elite office he had once idolized, Tae-chun felt a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Hwang handed him a temporary pass, telling him he could now come and go as he pleased. When Huang asked for his take on the news about Assemblyman Park, Tae-chun gave a sharp analysis. It was all a political stunt to manipulate public opinion. Huang smirked and said it was time for a new move. He immediately led Tae-chun out to face a wall of cameras. Huang whispered that while Assemblyman Park might own the headlines today, tomorrow's headlines would belong to the Special Investigations Unit. When reporters asked if the prosecution's current actions were just a revenge investigation against Park, Huang dropped a bombshell. He flatly denied it, claiming the office never issued such orders. Then he threw Tae-chun into the fire. He announced that since Tae-chun from the criminal division had been handling the case from the start, he should be the one to explain it to the public. Bathed in the blinding flashes of the media spotlight, Tae-chun delivered a powerful speech about building a healthy and fair society. Just like that, his public image was bulletproof and he was officially a star. That perfect performance in front of the cameras left Tae-chun feeling on top of the world. After work, he even took out his phone to record the moment. But then he saw a call from his uncle. Suddenly, a flood of old memories came rushing back. Back in high school, Tae-chun was a bright kid running for class president. But his homeroom teacher, a real piece of work, told him to drop out. "Think about it, kid," the teacher sneered. "Your mom works at a bar, doesn't she? She spends her nights pouring drinks for men just to keep you fed, right?" Then, he had the nerve to ask exactly which bar she worked at, saying he might want to pay her a visit. Tae-chun's fists clenched until his knuckles turned white. Seeing the rage in the boy's eyes, the teacher didn't back down. He actually swung at him. Tae-chun snapped. He grabbed a chair, shoved the teacher down, and ended up at the police station. When his mother arrived and saw her son in trouble because of her, she couldn't stop crying. She sobbed and apologized over and over, blaming herself for everything. It wasn't long before his uncle, Eun-yong, came to the rescue. To get Tae-chun out of that mess, Eun-yong spent an amount of money equal to the price of a small apartment. When Tae-chun promised to pay him back, Eun-yong looked him in the eye. He told the boy straight up that he didn't mind the money, but he had one rule. Tae-chun was never, ever allowed to make his sister, Tae-chun's mother, cry again. You could see right then how much Eun-yong truly cared for his family. That day, Tae-chun vowed he would become a prosecutor and use the law to lock up every low-life scumbag in the world. That incident forced Tae-chun to grow up fast. He worked tirelessly to get on TV, hoping his mother would see him and be proud. You see, by the time his mother turned 40, a lifetime of working in bars and selling alcohol had taken its toll. She was diagnosed with alcoholic dementia. Thanks to Eun-yong's wealth, she was placed in the most elite nursing home available. But while she's physically healthy, she's trapped in the past forever. She doesn't even recognize the man Tae-chun has become. Back in the present, Eun-yong orders some fried chicken. He grumbles about how ordering chicken is so complicated these days, but his face lights up when he sees his nephew. He opens his arms for a big hug, and though Tae-chun acts embarrassed and awkward, Eun-yong pulls him in tight anyway, holding him with pure, unconditional love. But while there is love in Eun-yong's world, there is only cold calculation in Inju's. To maximize his profits, Inju doesn't just lend money to businessmen. He demands their company shares as collateral. His true goal? To short sell their stocks into the ground. If a stock price drops by even 10%, Inju gains the right to dump those shares. The moment a desperate businessman signs that contract, Inju's predatory trap snaps shut. First, he uses his massive capital to aggressively short the company's stock. At the same time, he leaks poisonous rumors to drive the price even lower. To the public, it looks like a natural market dip, but in reality, it's a cold-blooded execution. As the stock prices plummet, the terrified business owners come crawling to him, asking if he's the one dumping the shares. But that's exactly what he wants. Eun-yong would then show them the stocks and demand that the contract be settled immediately. With no other choice, the businessmen are forced to beg for mercy. They agree to pay an extra 10% in interest just to keep the contract alive. But do you think Inju is satisfied with that? No. That's when the real hunt begins. Once the stock price hits a floor, say, below 180, Inju immediately dumps everything and continues to short the stock. The deeper the price falls, the more millions he rakes in. Before long, the business hits rock bottom with no way out. The entrepreneurs are forced to declare bankruptcy, driven to the very edge of despair. When these broken men eventually take their own lives, Inju isn't shocked. He's just annoyed. He'll coldly complain about how inconvenient and unlucky it is for someone to do something so foolish on his watch. When Eun-yong was ordered by the chairman to open the safe and take out a white funeral envelope, he finally understood the true horror of the man he worked for. Inju had those envelopes prepared in advance. He already knew exactly who was going to die before they even knew it themselves. In that pivotal moment, Eun-yong decided to break his chains and leave Inju for good. But Tae-chun didn't see a hero. He saw a mirror image. He told Eun-yong that he was no different from Inju. Both used their massive wealth to destroy lives. Eun-yong fired back with a sharp question. And what makes you and Ki-suk any different? He pointed out that Ki-suk is Inju's son-in-law, yet Tae-chun was the one appearing in the news right alongside him. Was Tae-chun planning to walk that same corrupt path? Seeing his nephew speechless, Eun-yong laid out a deal. He would help Tae-chun climb to the very top. Using his inside knowledge of Inju's dirty tactics, he promised to help Tae-chun put the old man behind bars. The only condition, Tae-chun had to cut ties with Ki-suk once and for all. On the other side of the chessboard, Ki-suk tracked down Jun-kyung. He tried to persuade her to drop her grudge, warning her not to think that wearing a military uniform made her untouchable. He bragged that every step of his rise to power was calculated and earned. He told her that if he were in her shoes, he'd know better than to cross him. But Jun-kyung didn't flinch. She coldly told him that she had spent 3 years obsessing over this, and she wasn't about to get the same math problem wrong a second time. She downed her drink and walked out, leaving him with a clear message. The war was far from over. While Jun-kyung was all business, Eun-yong was busy enjoying the high life, buying up luxury houses and cars across the city. Revenge, after all, didn't have to get in the way of a good time. He eventually paid a visit to Sister Kim, who was stunned to see him. "Look who it is," she muttered. "When two old foxes like them meet, there's no need for small talk." Eun-yong got straight to the point. He wanted her to sell him Chang-hyun's contracts, the hard evidence of his market manipulation. Sister Kim, of course, wasn't interested in selling. But the moment Eun-yong whipped out a stack of Dong Demon bonds, she felt the walls closing in. She asked if he really thought he could just take over that easily. With just one phone call, Eun-yong had his associates wipe out the bonds in 3 other districts, rendering her Dong Demon bonds practically worthless. In the face of massive capital, every scheme is just child's play, and Sister Kim was no exception. He promised to help her finally take control of the Dong Demon market if she handed over that paper. "Consider it our little secret," he whispered. Meanwhile, Inju made a shocking discovery. Tae-chun was actually Eun-yong's nephew. He immediately called his son-in-law, Ki-suk, and told him to re-examine all recent entry records. He suspected Eun-yong had secretly slipped back into the country. That night, Tae-chun met with Jun-kyung, finally realizing she was his anonymous source. He started to thank her, but she cut him off mid-sentence. All she cared about was the progress of Inju's arrest. Tae-chun tried to hide behind official protocol, refusing to leak details. That's when Eun-yong dropped the bomb. He had the evidence on Chang-hyun, but Tae-chun had to ignore Ki-suk. When Tae-chun realized the evidence was purchased, his goody-two-shoes side kicked in. He started lecturing them about how illegal evidence is inadmissible in court. Jun-kyung, who already knew the score, was disgusted. She couldn't believe he was quoting textbooks while they were in the middle of a war. Seeing him as a liability, she walked out in disappointment. But this was all part of Eun-yong's plan. Under the night sky, Tae-chun vented his frustrations. He talked about how he didn't come from a powerful family and had no connections, meaning his chances of taking down the big sharks were getting slimmer by the day. Eun-yong looked at his naive nephew and asked, "Do you really think Ki-suk is ever going to launch a legitimate investigation against those sharks?" He held out an olive branch one last time. "Take my hand," he said, "and I will turn you into the highest-ranking prosecutor in the Republic of Korea." In the world of the powerful, nothing is impossible. Facing his uncle's offer, Tae-chun finally made his choice. He decided to stand by Eun-yong, because only by standing at the top can you truly see the world for what it is. Tae-chun was dying to know Eun-yong's master plan. Eun-yong didn't sugarcoat it. The law alone was toothless against a man like Inju. He explained that even if you throw men like him in prison, as long as they hold on to their wealth and influence, they'll just keep committing crimes from behind bars or the moment they get out. To truly destroy them, you have to strip them of their money and their power. And the first domino to fall? That was Chang-hyun. To back his uncle, Tae-chun made a high-stakes move. He leaked classified prosecution documents to Eun-yong. It was a massive gamble, not just for the revenge plot, but for Tae-chun's entire future. He was officially betting his life on Eun-yong's vision. The next day, Eun-yong set up a meeting with Chang-hyun at GM. He went straight for the jugular, offering to replace Inju as the primary investor in Chang-hyun's company. But Chang-hyun tried to play the man of honor card, claiming he valued loyalty and wasn't about to flip sides so easily. Even when Eun-yong offered to bankroll his run for mayor, Chang-hyun didn't budge. After all, Inju's son-in-law, Hwang, was a protege that Chang-hyun had personally mentored. Seeing that Chang-hyun wasn't going to be reasonable, Eun-yong dropped the hammer. He pulled out the hard evidence of Chang-hyun's stock manipulation. He pointed out that if this evidence fell into Hwang's hands, a man like Hwang would sacrifice Chang-hyun in a heartbeat just to protect his own career. Chang-hyun was shaken but still doubted that Inju would just hand over his shares. That's when Eun-yong revealed the truth. GM was built on the bones of the BlueNet Group. Inju and Huang had orchestrated the crime together. Even though the case was suspended after Yoon's tragic passing, the accomplices were still walking free. It was time to blow the whistle. When Jun Kyung walked into the room, Chang Hyun realized the walls were officially closing in. Meanwhile, Huang discovered that Eun Yong had slipped back into the country, and he did it in style on a private jet. Just as his father-in-law warned, Eun Yong was proving to be a formidable opponent. Huang's team also reported on the woman by Eun Yong's side, Han Na, an elite international investment pro with deep ties in both politics and business. She was now the partner of the investment firm Eun Yong had founded. Huang didn't want to get his hands dirty yet. Instead, he made a calculated call to the Financial Supervisory Service. At the same time, Eun Yong met with Han Na and handed her the leaked classified documents from the prosecutor's office. They were a roadmap of dirty money, but seeing them sent Han Na into a panic. She lashed out at Eun Yong, asking if he was trying to bankrupt her company by involving her in this. But Eun Yong was unfazed. He had already secured his leverage over Chang Hyun. Elsewhere, Jun Kyung and Minister Sun were visiting her mother's memorial. After hearing Jun Kyung's plan, the minister decided to pull his own strings. The strategy was set. Jun Kyung would turn herself in to trigger a massive investigation, while Minister Sun used his political connections to launch a full-scale assault. He warned her that the enemy would use every dirty trick in the book to destroy her. He told her she could still back out, but Jun Kyung was past the point of no return. Even though her military status could no longer protect her, she was willing to trade her life to expose the truth. That night, Jun Kyung returned home to find the lights blazing. Expecting an intruder, she walked in only to find Eun Yong. He hadn't just broken in. He had cleaned the entire house and cooked a massive, beautiful dinner. It was a level of warmth Jun Kyung hadn't felt in years. But as they sat there, the weight of the past hung heavy. She confessed that her mother's final words weren't for her, but for Minister Sun. In her heart, Jun Kyung was haunted by the thought that she had been a profound disappointment to her mother before the end. Eun Yong looked at Jun Kyung and told her the truth. The reason Yoon didn't leave her a final message wasn't out of disappointment. She didn't want to leave a burden on her daughter's shoulders. She wanted Jun Kyung to finally be free and happy. Yoon had praised Jun Kyung to Eun Yong more times than he could count. While they were mapping out their future, Minister Sun was busy behind the scenes, negotiating with the top brass of his organization. They decided to seize the moment, using Jun Kyung's whistleblowing to completely dismantle Inju's empire. A massive showdown between good and evil was about to go down. But as Eun Yong was heading out to sign a crucial contract, he realized he was being hunted by a team of mercenaries. They were everywhere, even lying in wait inside the elevator. Earlier that day, Inju had discovered that Sister Kim had stabbed him in the back by selling the evidence against Chang Hyun to Eun Yong. To make sure she'd never forget her mistake, Inju didn't just punish her. He branded her with a literal hot iron before handing over all her assets to his henchman, Jin Ho. Back in the elevator, Eun Yong instantly recognized the thugs as Inju's dogs. Without skipping a beat, he lunged into a brutal 3-on-1 brawl. By the time the elevator doors opened again, Eun Yong was the only one standing. But Inju's reach was far and wide. Tae-chun was suddenly hauled in by Huang for a hostile interrogation. Huang revealed he knew all about Tae-chun being Eun Yong's nephew. Since Eun Yong had started buying up GM shares the moment he landed, Huang used it as leverage to accuse Tae-chun of leaking classified documents. He threatened to make Tae-chun the youngest corrupt prosecutor in history. Meanwhile, things were falling apart for Han Na too. The Financial Bureau launched a sudden, aggressive raid on her firm. Her only move left was to scrub every trace of the leaked prosecution files from her servers. Disaster struck when Eun Yong reached the parking garage. A car suddenly plowed into him, knocking him to the ground. The driver, an old friend from his past. As Eun Yong tried to plead with him to do the right thing, one of the thugs jammed a needle into his neck, sedating him instantly. Back at the office, Tae-chun was stripped of his security pass and barred from the building. Cornered and desperate, he tried to call his uncle, but Eun Yong was already unconscious. Jin Ho saw the incoming text from Tae-chun and coldly tossed Eun Yong's phone out of the moving car. When Tae-chun returned to his desk, he found himself under a full-blown security investigation. Sang-ail pulled him aside, frantic, asking what the hell had happened between him and Huang. At that very moment, Jin Ho was literally burying Eun Yong alive. He ordered his men to bring Eun Yong's bag to Inju, while he personally called to report the job well done. Watching the live feed of Eun Yong being buried in a shallow grave, Inju let out a satisfied laugh. His biggest problem was finally taken care of. Inju immediately went to brag to Chang Hyun, handing over the evidence that Sister Kim had sold. Chang Hyun wasted no time and incinerated the documents on the spot. With the evidence gone, they thought they were untouchable. When Chang Hyun asked what happened to Eun Yong, Inju lied through his teeth, claiming Eun Yong was under financial investigation and had been deported. Chang Hyun told Inju to start prepping his campaign funds. Inju agreed, but not without a cold warning. Next time, consult with me before you do anything. But who was Chang Hyun kidding? To him, Inju was just a low-level thug not worth a penny. In his mind, Inju just needed to shut up and do his job. Suddenly, Minister Sun realized the tide had turned. He called Jun Kyung with a frantic warning to cancel the press conference. The big fish in their camp had flipped and sided with Hwang. Worse, it looked like Chang Hyun had betrayed them. Hearing the news, Jun Kyung rushed to Eun Yong's place, only to run into Tae Chun, who was also searching for his missing uncle. Eun Yong finally gasped back to consciousness. It turns out, Jin Ho wasn't completely heartless. He wanted to repay Eun Yong for the kindness he once showed his grandmother. He secretly pulled Eun Yong out of the grave and prepared to smuggle him out of the country again. Go and never come back, Jin Ho warned. But Eun Yong wasn't done. He tried one last time to pull Jin Ho over to his side. He couldn't believe his old comrade, a man he had bled with, had wandered so far down a path of no return. As they sped down the road, Eun Yong looked at him and asked, "Are you wearing your seatbelt?" Before Jin Ho could even process the question, Eun Yong barked, "What? Are you scared?" and suddenly lunged for the steering wheel. The car swerved violently, screaming across the pavement before slamming into a parked vehicle. Eun Yong, battered but alive, used Jin Ho's phone to call for help before disappearing into the night. It was a final, tragic goodbye between old friends. When Jun Kyung and Tae Chun heard the news, they sprinted to the hospital. Seeing Eun Yong cracked and bruised but still cracking jokes made Jun Kyung explode with anger. "Why are you all so worried?" he teased. "I'm the one who got hit." But while the opposition was paralyzed with fear, Ki-suk was busy cornering Tae Chun. It was clearly another one of Inju's dirty plays. Chang Hyun had betrayed them, but Eun Yong didn't even flinch. Why? Because he still had an ace up his sleeve. You know the saying, "The enemy of my enemy is my friend." That friend was Assemblyman Park, the very man Hwang was trying to destroy. With Han-na leading the charm offensive, they quickly brought Park into their fold. Jun Kyung was disgusted. To her, these politicians were vultures, only thinking of their own filthy and cowardly interests. But that was exactly what Eun Yong needed. See, Eun Yong had set a trap for Inju long ago. Remember that bag Inju's men took? Inside was a blueprint for a mesh patent. The plan was brilliant. Use the patent registered by Yoon years ago, find a foreign front company, and sell it to developing Southeast Asian nations. They'd use a shell company to go public and rake in billions. The only hurdle? The GM company, the ghost of BlueNet, was in the process of being delisted. Lawyer Lee was worried that GM being under the microscope would block the patent transfer. But for Inju and his crooks, that was a joke. They had broken so many laws. What was one more? The next day, with a bribe no more expensive than the price of a cup of coffee, Lawyer Lee successfully grease-monkeyed the patent transfer. But just as he was walking out to celebrate, Sang-il was waiting. "Surprise, counselor. You're under arrest." While the lawyer was being hauled away, Eun Yong's real hammer blow landed. At a massive press conference hosted by Assemblyman Park, Jun Kyung stepped onto the stage. She exposed everything, how she had been forced to frame her own mother. Every camera in the room was aimed directly at Hwang and his corrupt unit. The war had officially moved into the courtroom, and Ki-suk could feel the noose tightening. Realizing this wasn't Jun Kyung's idea, Ki-suk frantically called his father-in-law. "Is Eun Yong really dead?" he screamed. Just as Inju was confirming the kill, Tae Chun stormed the building with a specialized task force. With charges of embezzlement and abuse of power, he personally arrested Chairman Inju. This single move catapulted Tae Chun's career into the stratosphere. But Eun Yong was already moving on to the next play. He met with Chang Hyun and offered him a deal. He would turn Chang Hyun into a member of the National Assembly. Eun Yong didn't just want money. He wanted to build his own political empire in Korea, and he needed his own puppets in high places. Chang Hyun was skeptical. He'd seen Inju try and fail for years to buy a seat. But when Eun Yong offered him Assemblyman Park's own constituency as the trade, Chang Hyun's jaw hit the floor. With Assemblyman Park essentially out of the race, Eun Yong's offer to Chang Hyun had a massive chance of succeeding. It was a deal too sweet to refuse. When Hwang tried calling him, Chang Hyun didn't even pick up. He was already ghosting his old allies. Eun Yong told him flatly, "If you don't answer that phone, I'm taking it as a sign you're ready to close our deal." On the other side of the city, Ki-suk was busy trying to bully Young-soo. He was as arrogant as ever, treating Young-soo like a piece of trash. To Ki-suk, Young-soo was just a pathetic errand boy. Even when Young-soo begged for a transfer to Busan just to get away, Ki-suk only gave him a cold, mocking laugh. He didn't realize that even an errand boy can change the world if he's pushed too far. The momentum shifted instantly when Chang Hyun brought his entire interest group over to Eun Yong's camp. These were powerful men, each holding a status equivalent to a regional chief prosecutor. Facing Eun Yong, a man whose financial genius even surpassed Inju's, they were more than satisfied with their new leader. Following Eun Yong's orders, they launched an investigation into Hwang. But when they questioned if discarding a talent like Hwang was a waste, Chang Hyun suggested someone even better for the job, Yong-soo. In the blink of an eye, the empire crumbled. Inju was behind bars, and Hwang was stripped of his rank and placed under investigation. When Eun Yong visited Inju in prison, the old man was fuming with rage. The student he had personally raised was now the architect of his total destruction. Inju thought he could just pay a fine and walk away, but Eun Yong dropped a bombshell. This wasn't just about embezzlement anymore. The courts had authorized a full-scale investigation, and Eun Yong, acting as a patriotic whistleblower, was going to dig up every single cent Inju had ever hidden. As Eun Yong walked out of the cell, he ran right into Inju's daughter. The air between them was thick with tension. They were once incredibly close, but now they stood on opposite sides of a bloody war. It was obvious to anyone watching that these two had a deep romantic history. Desperate to escape the law, Ki-suk turned to his second-in-command. This guy was talented enough to lead the Special Investigations Unit himself, but he was content playing the loyal dog for Hwang, believing it was his only path to the top. The next day, Inju arranged a meeting with Sister Kim. Even though she pledged her loyalty, Inju did something that shocked her. He told her to sue him. It was a bizarre move, but he promised her that in exchange, he'd give her back her shares in Dong Demon. It was all a calculated trap by Ki-suk. Once Sister Kim sued Inju, Jang Dong-chun, an old classmate of Hwang's, could officially summon him for questioning. That night, Inju was brought before Jang. But Jang didn't ask questions. He just took a phone call and walked out of the room. Moments later, the second-in-command walked in with a bag. "You have 3 hours," he told Inju. "Make it quick." Immediately after, Chang Hyun received an anonymous text, a series of scandalous, career-ending photos of himself. Cornered by Inju, who was now threatening him face-to-face, Chang Hyun was forced to promise he'd bail the old man out. On the surface, Chang Hyun played along perfectly. As he turned to leave, Inju slipped an envelope into his coat pocket. Chang Hyun thought it was just a bribe, a little thank you for his help, but it was a deadly setup by Hwang. That envelope wasn't money, it was a forged suicide note. The next day, Eun Yong's world was rocked by a phone call from his nephew. Chang Hyun had been found dead. A suicide. The police found the note in his pocket, and every finger was suddenly pointed at Eun Yong. The note claimed Eun Yong had been blackmailing and threatening him, driving him to take his own life. Eun Yong was now officially a fugitive, the #1 target on the police's most wanted list. But those who knew him knew he wasn't a man who would just give up. As the police swarmed his office, Jun Kyung acted fast, whisking him away to hide at her place. Within hours, Eun Yong's entire company was locked down and frozen. It looked like his empire had crumbled in a single night. But if you think Eun Yong is that easy to take down, you haven't been paying attention. Looking at a photo of Chang Hyun, Eun Yong realized his death was a brutal, calculated move he hadn't seen coming. Now, there was only one card left to play. In broad daylight, right in front of the world, the most wanted man in the country walked into the lobby of the prosecutor's office without a single hint of fear. As he walked past stunned prosecutors, he didn't even blink. His nephew, Tae-chun, was horrified. "Are you crazy? You're a wanted man, you shouldn't be here." But this was exactly what Eun Yong wanted. He looked his nephew in the eye and said, "Arrest me, Tae-chun. Do it yourself." Why would he walk into a prison cell? To understand that, we have to look back. Years ago, Eun Yong lost both his parents and was arrested for robbery. His older sister, still a minor and unable to be his guardian, was so desperate to protect him that she smashed the windows of the police station just so she'd be arrested and thrown into the same cell with him. "Don't be afraid," she had told him. "I'll protect you." 3 years later, Tae-chun was born. From that moment, even as a young boy, Eun Yong vowed he would protect his family at all costs. Now, facing Inju's counterattack, Eun Yong had to be reckless. He turned himself in to Tae-chun to ensure his family wouldn't be dragged into the line of fire. Standing before the national media, he didn't just deny the charges. He dropped a cryptic hint that his trusted friends would soon step forward with the truth. This put his allies in a nightmare position. Just minutes before, Ki-suk had shown them scandalous photos to blackmail them into silence. If they didn't want to end up like Chang Hyun, they had to side with Hwang. But Ki-suk wasn't done yet. As Tae-chun was bringing Eun Yong in, Ki-suk intercepted them, using his authority to snatch Eun Yong away. The two ultimate rivals finally stood face to face. "Why are you framing him?" Eun Yong asked. He knew Ki-suk's plan. Frame Eun Yong for Chang Hyun's death and hope he'd run, so they could arrest him or kill him, on much heavier charges. Eun Yong turning himself in had completely ruined their script. I didn't expect our loyal friends to arrange this meeting so quickly, Eun-young mocked. Ki-suk mused that if they weren't on opposite sides, they might have been friends. But Eun-young cut through the nonsense. My target was always Inju. You're just his lapdog. Suddenly, a veteran prosecutor appeared. But he wasn't there to prosecute. He was there as Eun-young's defense attorney. This was the trusted friend Eun-young had mentioned. However, Ki-suk had already rigged the game. He had Eun-young transferred to a detention center where every guard and inmate was on Inju's payroll. That night, Eun-young was dragged to an abandoned workshop inside the prison, where Inju and his goons were waiting. Inju looked at the student he had raised and prepared to destroy him with his own hands. But Eun-young's survival instincts kicked in. He launched a fierce counterattack, nearly taking Inju down. In the chaos, he managed to pull a fire alarm and grabbed a guard to use as a human shield. But before the prison authorities could arrive, one of the mercenaries lunged forward and drove a screwdriver deep into Eun-young's side. When Eun-young finally woke up in the hospital, the nightmare had only gotten worse. He wasn't just a fugitive anymore. He was now being charged with the murder of a fellow inmate. After that, Eun-young was knocked out cold. In an instant, the tide completely turned against him, sending his entire faction into a state of pure panic. Every single piece of evidence was now stacked against Eun-young. Not only were Inju's henchmen pointing the finger at him, but the murder weapon itself was covered in his fingerprints. Faced with this impossible situation, Tae-chun received a mysterious phone call. To his surprise, it was Sae-hee, Inju's own daughter. She reached out with a shocking offer to help Eun-young. She claimed that out of everyone who ever served under Inju, Eun-young was the only one with a shred of decency. She knew he was being framed, and she claimed she was the only person who could save him. But there was a catch, a big one. In exchange, she wanted the original documents held by Jun-kyung and a promise that they would stop working with Assemblyman Park immediately. Tae-chun, in his desperation and naivety, actually believed her. He took the proposal to Jun-kyung, but she saw right through it. Knowing Ki-suk's true nature and having lived through the tragedy of her mother, Jun-kyung refused to hand over the files. When Tae-chun insisted on prioritizing Eun-young's safety over the bigger picture, Jun-kyung reached her breaking point and officially cut ties with him. Without their leader, the alliance began to crumble from the inside. That night, Jun-kyung ran into a completely wasted Tae-chun on his way home. "Please save my uncle. I'm begging you," he whimpered. When Jun-kyung coldly stood her ground, Tae-chun snapped. He let out all his bottled-up rage, screaming at her. He said he wanted to be a clean, honest prosecutor, but now that his family was being destroyed, he didn't give a damn about justice. He just wanted to save his own. Naive Tae-chun was officially losing it. Meanwhile, Inju was released from prison, exactly as Ki-suk had planned. With Eun-young sidelined, their only real threat was Jun-kyung's alliance with Assemblyman Park. The next morning, as Jun-kyung sped toward a press conference, she was suddenly boxed in by a fleet of unmarked cars. Despite her elite driving skills, she was trapped. Faced with a mob of mercenaries armed with iron pipes, she didn't show a hint of fear, but the odds were too high. Jun-kyung was brutally attacked and left for dead. As the thugs searched her for the USB drive, she managed to rip the mask off their leader. She gasped in horror. It was one of Eun-young's oldest friends. With Jun-kyung missing, Assemblyman Park was livid. Tae-chun showed up and handed him the evidence Jun-kyung had left behind. But then news broke. Jun-kyung had been hospitalized and was in a deep coma. Just as Tae-chun reached the hospital, he saw the headlines. Assemblyman Park had abruptly canceled the press conference. It was a total betrayal. Inju had made Park an offer he couldn't refuse, and the alliance was dead. When Eun-young heard the news in prison, that Jun-kyung was in a coma and his own brother was the one who did it, he lost his mind. The peace he had found on the Mongolian plains evaporated in a second. Like a caged lion, he unleashed his fury on Kim, the henchman responsible. Even as the guards rained down blows with their clubs, Eun-young didn't stop until his opponent couldn't stand. He was thrown into solitary confinement. A month passed. Jun-kyung was still unconscious, and the perpetrators were still walking free. But when Eun-young finally stepped out of that dark cell, his eyes were as calm as a still lake. He took the subsequent revenge attacks from Kim's men without a word. Just when it looked like he was in danger, the proud lion of the past returned. Through a conversation with his friend Jin-ho, he learned that Old Man Kim used to secretly shadow Inju's investments to make a little side profit. That was the spark he needed. Eun-young began tracking the chairman's clients with surgical precision. Once he had the exact investment data, Eun-young decided to mortgage his apartment. Combined with Jin-ho's cash, he prepared to make a killing in the market in record time. Eun-young's aggressive moves sparked a massive blowout at home with his sister. They had a heated, shouting match. She was livid, terrified that her brother was falling back into the same dark, criminal path that had haunted their past. A month later, A morning came when Old Man Kim arrived with his squad of thugs, looking for blood. "Why is the construction stock crashing?" he roared. "What? The stock dropped?" Eun Yong acted like a total failure, venting his frustration with his fists. Right then, Jin Ho stepped in, cursing Inju at the top of his lungs, calling him a scumbag who didn't care about their losses. But then, the twist. Eun Yong threw a heavy bag at him. Inside was a mountain of cold, hard cash. That was just Jin Ho's share. See, back when Eun Yong was gathering his capital, Inju had been loud-mouthing about stocks in front of all his men. That sent a chill down Eun Yong's spine because he knew Inju's nature. He knew that if a tip was actually real, Inju would be whisper quiet to keep the profit for himself. He'd never broadcast it. Eun Yong understood that the secret to wealth is all about the timing of the sale. So, every single night, he had been sneaking into Inju's office, dissecting his stock strategies. He ended up selling his shares exactly one day before Inju did, earning the first real fortune of his life. "I want to make money," he had said. Massive, legendary money. Now, that legend is trapped behind bars, facing a summons from the prosecutor's office and staying dead silent. He didn't say a word until Prosecutor Ham Jin spoke up. About 3 years ago, thanks to Ki-suk's betrayal, Ham Jin almost suffered a miscarriage. Back then, it was Jun Kyung who stepped in to help her carry the burden. Now that Jun Kyung is in a coma because of this case, Ham Jin is done staying quiet. She's decided to use all her power to help Eun Yong reach his goal. Meanwhile, Tae Chun, who is still suspended from duty, is playing shadow detective, stalking Inju's inner circle. He caught a lead on Lawyer Lee and offered double the price to intercept a deal, which led him to a major clue about a drug ring. After reaching the location, he snapped secret photos of the operation. Through Sang-il's decoding, they realized this was an illegal casino run by Old Man Kim. Sang-il warned Tae-chun to drop it, but Tae-chun refused. He blamed himself for the hit on Jun Kyung and told Sang-il he was on a mission to atone for his mistakes. His sheer stubbornness left Sang-il completely helpless. The next day, Eun Yong was summoned again, but he realized something was wrong. He wasn't being taken to the western branch where Ham Jin worked. It turned out Ki-suk had orchestrated a promotion for Ham Jin, moving her to a head position in Incheon just to get her off Eun Yong's case. This was all the handiwork of lawyer Kim, Eun Yong's own lead counsel, who was actually working for Ki-suk in exchange for lucrative real estate kickbacks. While this was happening, Inju was busy with a high-profile ribbon-cutting ceremony for his new charitable foundation. It was the first step in whitewashing his image and a new front for his money-making machine. But Eun Yong was already moving his pieces. He met with Han Na and, despite the worsening situation, decided to activate his company's branch in Canada. The real counterattack was about to begin. The plan started with the prison warden. While the warden was at the bank, sending money to his family in Canada, he received a terrifying shock. His wife and kids were in major trouble. His children were being kicked out of school, and they were losing their rented home. It was all Eun Yong's doing. The warden was beyond furious, ready to kill, but Eun Yong remained calm. The warden screamed, "You're so rich. Why make things this complicated for me? If you want to live, just let me go." But in the face of a true billionaire mastermind, a prison warden is nothing but a small fly. He finally realized that to survive, he had no choice but to bow down to Eun Yong. The prison warden had officially buckled under Eun Yong's overwhelming influence. Meanwhile, on the outside, Inju was busy meticulously checking his gift list. To ensure his son-in-law's promotion went off without a hitch, not a single person could be missed. These bribes were the fuel for Ki-suk's rise to power. At this critical stage, even the smallest mistake could cause their entire empire to come crashing down. Inju promised to keep moving with his usual cold caution, but the very next day, he handed Lawyer Lee a massive stack of files. These were the companies Inju planned to target for stock manipulation, exploiting every legal loophole he could find. Even Lawyer Lee was stunned by the sheer scale of the operation. After all, the money for a son-in-law's high-level promotion doesn't just grow on trees. What Inju didn't know was that inside the prison, Eun Yong, with the full support of the warden, was already dissecting the Betrayal fund. He realized the fund was nothing more than a classic Ponzi scheme, using money from new investors to pay off the old ones to keep an out-of-control system from collapsing. To hide the rot, they used banks to rebrand their image, but Eun Yong knew Inju's nature. Inju would never follow the rules. He was definitely planning to siphon off the capital for himself. The key lay in the companies Inju had already bought into. Eun Yong's counterstrike was officially in motion. Eun Yong made sure to reward the warden for his help. Not only were the warden's kids' school issues solved, but his family was moved into a luxury home in a top-tier school district. Eun Yong even personally remanaged the warden's stock portfolio. That same day, Eun Yong met with Han Na and gave the order, short sell every single one of those stocks. This was the counterattack strategy. But there was a wild card, Eun Yong's nephew, Tae Chun. He had been missing for a while, and it turned out he had borrowed a massive sum of money from Han Na before disappearing. Tae-chun was currently deep undercover at Old Man Kim's illegal casino, tracking a high-level drug dealer named Lee. But as a rookie in the underworld, Tae-chun made a clumsy mistake and was quickly spotted by the thugs surrounding him. While tailing Lee, Tae-chun was suddenly surrounded. He tried to pull rank, using his status as a prosecutor to intimidate them, but these criminals didn't give a damn about a badge. They didn't want to kill a prosecutor themselves, but they were more than happy to hand him over to someone who would. Just as they were about to drag him into a car, the police swooped in for a last-minute rescue. The lead officer was livid. He nearly punched Tae-chun, screaming that his reckless lone wolf stunt almost blew a sting operation they had been planning for weeks. But after the scolding, the officer delivered the best news Tae-chun had ever heard. Jun Kyung was finally awake. Tae-chun sprinted to the hospital and found Jun Kyung sitting quietly by the door. "Senior, don't you recognize me? Did you lose your memory?" he blurted out. His clumsy, panicked reaction made Jun Kyung feel a mix of annoyance and genuine warmth. She could see the heart in this young man. Soon, word reached Eun-yong in prison that Jun Kyung had recovered. The crushing weight on Eun-yong's soul finally lifted. In that moment of peace, he felt as if Yoon were sitting right there with him, as if the world were finally righting itself. But the battle wasn't over. Eun-yong's trial was about to begin. To the shock of the entire courtroom, the first thing Eun-yong did was fire his entire elite legal team on the spot. As the room erupted in whispers and the fired lawyers stormed out in a rage, Eun-yong revealed his new counsel, Jun Kyung. She stepped forward to take the lead. Facing the judge and the cameras, Eun-yong looked the court in the eye and countered every single charge. He wasn't just defending himself, he was declaring war. "I plead not guilty," he announced, and the real fight had only just begun. Just 24 hours earlier, Eun-yong's elite inner circle had gathered in Incheon. Eun-yong was there himself. A month apart had felt like an eternity for this duo, both of whom were consumed by a cold, relentless hunger for revenge. Eun-yong brought everyone together for one reason. Stock manipulation might look easy on paper, but very few teams actually pull it off. Everyone in that room was a heavy hitter he could trust, and they had one singular target, the stocks being puppet-mastered by Chairman In-ju. The operation to dismantle In-ju began right then and there. Meanwhile, Ki-suk received a package, a set of documents Eun-yong had smuggled out through a prison guard. It was a mountain of evidence proving In-ju's illegal stock trades. Enraged, Ki-suk stormed off to confront his father-in-law. He couldn't believe the old man was still playing these dirty, illegal games during the most critical phase of Ki-suk's promotion. Right now, the Incheon prosecutor's office has officially opened an investigation into In-ju. Even if In-ju sold his stocks this second, he'd only be burying more evidence of his crimes. But to save his own fortune, In-ju ignored Ki-suk's warnings and decided to dump every single share he held. Ki-suk slammed his laptop shut, smashing it into 1,000 pieces in a fit of pure rage. "You set this whole thing up, didn't you?" he screamed at the air. "Why is it always me? Why am I the one who has to clean up your mess? Do you have a death wish?" Just like that, the alliance of villains began to shatter from the inside. On the other side, Han-na was taking no chances with Jun Kyung's safety. She assigned her 3 top-tier bodyguards, all of them former National Intelligence Service agents. "I'm Agent Choi," the lead guard told her. "Whatever you need, I'm at your service." Jun Kyung looked at him and asked, "Does that mean you'll do anything I say?" It made her think back to something Eun-yong once told her. In-ju and Old Man Kim used drugs to keep their subordinates on a short leash, and Jin-ho was one of their primary victims. Under Eun-yong's calculated direction, he arranged a secret meeting with Ki-suk. Ki-suk was confused. Why would Eun-yong tip him off instead of just letting In-ju fall? The truth was, neither of them trusted the legal system. Eun-yong proposed a deal. If Ki-suk cooperated, Eun-yong would seize every penny In-ju owned and transfer it all to Hwang's wife. From that point on, In-ju would have to bow down and serve Hwang. But there was a non-negotiable condition. Tae-chun had to be reinstated as a prosecutor immediately. It's true what they say. In the world of power, there are no permanent enemies, only permanent interests. These two rivals, who were at each other's throats just yesterday, were now standing on the same side for a mutual payout. With Ki-suk's backing, Tae-chun was back in his office in record time. Eun-yong also entered the prosecutor's office, officially acting as an investigative consultant. Using Tae-chun as the face of the operation, Hwang launched a massive probe into his own father-in-law's businesses. Their first target was In-ju's most vital partner, who was hauled in on charges of massive illegal transactions. In an instant, the prosecutor's office was the center of a media firestorm, and Eun-yong's team was moving like a hurricane. When Ki-suk's subordinates questioned why they were working with the enemy, Ki-suk coldly explained that he was just using them. If Tae-chun made one wrong move, Ki-suk planned to let him take the fall for everything. Meanwhile, Incheon was breathing down In-ju's neck. With lawyer Lee's help, Inju realized that Eun-yong was the ghost in the machine. But Inju wasn't a man to roll over and die. When the police tried to move in on him, they were suddenly blocked by a mysterious force. When the authorities reached Old Man Kim's hideout, they discovered that the most important witnesses were already gone. It was all Jun Kyung's handiwork. Her goal was to use Jin-ho, Inju's longtime henchman, to squeeze out every last drop of evidence. Jin-ho had been chemically dependent on drugs for years. As he stared at the wasting supply of the drug he lived for, his entire body began to shake uncontrollably. At this point, Inju is having a meal with his son-in-law, Ki-suk, and he isn't hiding his frustration. But when he sees the classified documents, Ki-suk slides across the table. A wide, greedy grin spreads across his face. He thinks he can use this insider information to make a massive fortune. What he doesn't realize is that this is a lethal trap set by Ki-suk himself. The moment Inju completes an insider trade using those files, Ki-suk is ready to pull the trigger and order his men to arrest the old man. In an instant, every cent of that investment turns into worthless paper. When Inju storms into Namsun Bank, trying to use his son-in-law's name to bully the chairman into investing, he gets a rude awakening. The chairman coldly informs him that Ki-suk personally called and gave the order to ignore his father-in-law entirely. Furious, Inju tries to reach Ki-suk, but his calls are brushed off with calculated indifference. Ki-suk is busy now. He's already eyeing a seat in the next political election. That night, Inju meets his daughter at home, but the lifeline she offers is just another betrayal. She tells her father to hand over every single asset he has to her. She tells him to stay home and enjoy his retirement while she handles everything. Inju sees right through it. This isn't his daughter's style. It's Eun-yong's fingerprints all over the plan. He realizes his own son-in-law and Eun-yong have officially teamed up to destroy him. Meanwhile, Jun Kyung's investigation hits a breakthrough. She discovers that on the day Chang-hyun was murdered, Inju's entry and exit logs at the detention center match perfectly. She knows he's tied to death. She confronts Jin-ho with the evidence. Do you have any idea what happened to Director Oh? Jin-ho knows the truth, but he refuses to talk unless Jun Kyung gives him a fix. But as he stares at the vial in her hand, he loses it. Jun Kyung has her men bring out a lab report. The drugs Inju had been giving him were laced with lethal toxins designed to kill him. Jin-ho can't believe Inju would actually try to murder him. But as Jun Kyung tosses the vial to the floor, Jin-ho collapses, sobbing and screaming in a fit of pure rage. When he was no longer useful, he was just trash to be incinerated. That's the tragedy of a pawn. Inju is a heartless monster, but Inju isn't finished. He realizes Eun-yong's plan and decides to play the scorched earth card. He orders an immediate halt on all stock buybacks and prepares to declare bankruptcy. Under Inju's manipulation, the fund has become a financial monster. If it declares bankruptcy now, it will trigger an unprecedented economic disaster, and every single shareholder will be wiped out. Inju figures he's safe because he's bankrupted so many people before, and the high-level officials who took his bribes won't dare to point their spears at him. He figures if he goes down, he's taking the whole system to hell with him. Eun-yong didn't expect Inju to be willing to chain everyone to his sinking ship. Has Eun-yong finally lost? After thinking all night, he finally finds the key to breaking the deadlock. On a Black Wednesday, the fund officially announces it's stopping the billion-dollar buybacks. In a heartbeat, the entire stock market is on the brink of a total collapse. With their golden plan going up in smoke, Ki-suk crawls back to being Inju's henchman. Facing Eun-yong again, Ki-suk's first thought is to turn Eun-yong's nephew into the sacrificial lamb. He targets Eun-yong's ultimate weakness, Tae-chun's future. But when Ki-suk tries to use Tae-chun as leverage, Eun-yong isn't surprised at all. Instead, Eun-yong has the warden bring out a secret file. He tells Ki-suk to pin the entire fund's bankruptcy on a guerrilla group of rogue investors. This won't just distract the angry public. It will allow Ki-suk to collaborate with the feds and boost his reputation to legendary levels. Eun-yong has only one condition. His nephew, Tae-chun, must be part of the special task force. This is his insurance policy, but the plan is incredibly risky. The next day, Eun-yong receives terrifying news. Every single one of his protective guards in prison has been reassigned. Even the warden has been moved to a different facility. Staring down Inju's army of thugs, Eun-yong was ready. He had anticipated this and was prepared to fight every single one of them alone. Despite Jun Kyung's overwhelming worry, Eun-yong managed to keep a smile on his face. No matter how grim the situation, he always made sure to show his family a look of calm and relief. Meanwhile, Jin-ho had finally escaped the grip of the drugs, but his condition was critical. The toxins had already burrowed too deep into his system. When word reached Eun-yong, he stayed stoic, but inside, he knew his brother was in a bad way. Jun Kyung offered to sneak Jin-ho out of the country to save him, but Jin-ho had one final request before making his move. He wanted to visit his grandmother's grave. Years ago, when Jin-ho was locked up, It was Eun Yong who had looked after the old woman. Jin Ho had always dreamed of the glitz and glamour that Eun Yong had, but life had only dealt him bad hands. Knowing his body was failing, he realized he had one last job to do. A true man of the underworld pays his debts in blood, and it was time for his final mission. That night, Jin Ho charged into the mob's hideout alone, taking on anyone who crossed his path. His goal was the criminal ledger Inju's black book. As the pounding on the door grew more frantic, Jin Ho finally found it. Surrounded by his former associates, he fought like a wounded old wolf. Even as his body was soaked in blood, he continued to fight with his very last breath. By the time Jun Kyung and the others arrived, it was all over. Soon after, Eun Yong received the news. The murder charges against him had been dropped. Even Inju's prison faction was being rounded up and investigated. It was because of Uncle Jin Ho, his nephew told him, but he didn't make it. Eun Yong stood frozen, unable to believe his friend was gone, especially after hearing Jin Ho's final words from his deathbed. The slow, painful words of repentance and blessing left Eun Yong shattered. The tears he had held back for so long finally fell. Memories of Jin Ho flooded back. The tragic, small-time crook who fell into a dark life because of poverty, but who, in his moment of clarity, chose friendship over everything else. Eun Yong, just punch me once and run. Those old words echoed in his mind as he finished his drink. Thanks to Jin Ho's ultimate sacrifice, the prosecution now had the evidence to dismantle Old Man Kim's crew. The framing of Eun Yong was exposed, and he was finally released on bail. However, in the chaos following Jin Ho's death, Lawyer Lee, the ultimate fall guy, managed to slip away into the shadows. This left the high-ranking officials at the prosecutor's office in a state of fury. Even without Sudong, the fund was a sinking ship, but Inju was never going to just sit around and wait for the end. When Old Man Kim was interrogated by Ham Jin, he took all the blame on himself. But when he returned to his cell, he was met with the cold, predatory stares of his fellow inmates. The next day, Old Man Kim was found dead in the prison bathroom, a staged suicide. Ham Jin was furious and demanded a full investigation into the death, but she was immediately hit with a counterattack. Other inmates falsely accused her of using physical force and assaulting Kim during his interrogation. Just like that, Ham Jin was suspended and stripped of her authority. When Ki-suk heard the news and called his father-in-law, Inju coldly denied having anything to do with it. But then, the media firestorm hit Ki-suk. Reporters swarmed him, armed with evidence that Ki-suk had been colluding with Sudong and taking massive bribes. The evidence was undeniable, but this was Inju's masterstroke. He didn't just destroy the evidence and frame Ham Jin. He burned his own son-in-law to save himself. Ki-suk, the man who was once the pride of the prosecutor's office, saw his career tossed away like trash. A titan of the legal world had been wiped off the stage in a single night. But this wasn't the victory Eun Yong wanted. He stayed up for countless nights, agonizing over why he had failed, until his thoughts returned to Yoon. What was she really fighting for back then? Was it just to snatch Inju's fortune or to strip Ki-suk of his rank? No. Eun Yong realized that Yoon was fighting against something much bigger. A system of rot that stretched from the highest courts down to the most powerful conglomerates. He realized that his real mission wasn't just to squash a few parasites. It was to burn down the entire corrupt structure. And he had already cast his bait. Just a day earlier, Inju had reached out to him. The old man had figured it out. He knew the Singaporean investment fund was actually Eun Yong's shell company. The way the fund moved was exactly how Inju operated. There are only two people in this world who know how to short sell like that, Inju had said. If it isn't me, it has to be you. Inju was now using Ki-suk's downfall to protect himself. But the truth about Yoon's tragic passing was still a card Eun Yong held. Inju offered a deal. He wanted Eun Yong to buy him out at double the price. Eun Yong agreed instantly on one condition: the investigation into Ham Jin had to stop immediately. It was a clean, fast deal. The transaction went through smoothly, but Inju didn't realize he had just walked right into another one of Eun Yong's traps. Soon, Ham Jin was cleared of all charges and released. The high-ranking officials in the prosecutor's office had always seen her as an outsider, a rebel. But now, seeing how she was freed, they assumed she was just as corrupt as the rest of them. When Tae-chun rushed to meet her, Ham Jin realized the truth. Eun Yong had made a backroom deal with the elite to save her. As a mother and a prosecutor, she felt a profound sense of shame. She told Tae-chun she was walking away from Eun Yong's revenge squad. She wanted to uphold justice through the law, and only the law. Ham Jin's departure left Tae-chun with a lot to think about. When he visited his mother alongside his uncle, Tae-chun dropped a bombshell of his own. He wanted out of the revenge game, too. He knew using the legal system to take down Inju would be a mountain of a challenge, but he was ready to try, even if it meant he'd never be a famous prosecutor. Eun Yong looked at his nephew and smiled. He was incredibly proud. From that moment on, Tae-chun was no longer Eun Yong's weakness. He was a man of his own. Then there was lawyer Lee. He was once a promising young prosecutor with a bright future, but he got caught in the crossfire between Eun-young and In-ju and lost everything. After being framed and discarded by In-ju, he had once been so desperate to quit that he purposely crashed into a police station just to get fired. But facing a mastermind like In-ju, every debt must eventually be paid. Lee had become worthless to the chairman. However, In-ju had one more use for him. "Get on your knees," In-ju commanded, "and I'll wipe your debt clean, principal and interest." Desperate, Lee begged for the chance to serve him. Just like that, lawyer Lee became In-ju's ultimate fixer, handling every shady connection and backroom deal. Even Ki-suk, now stripped of his power, tried to host a dinner for the elites, only to find In-ju waiting for him instead. In-ju's goal was simple: turn Ki-suk into the second lawyer Lee. "Are you telling me to be a money launderer like Sudong?" Ki-suk asked, disgusted. But In-ju just laughed. He told him that money is the only true power. Even when Ki-suk was at the top of his game, In-ju used money to drag him down into the mud. "A man in power can't always command money," In-ju said, "but the man with the money can always control the power." In the end, Ki-suk broke. He submitted. On the other side of the chessboard, Sang-il was receiving a warm welcome from the chief. But it wasn't a friendly visit. The chief wanted Sang-il to switch sides and spy on Tae-chun's every move. For the man who just seized power, every subordinate had to be kept on a very short leash. With the chief's promise of a promotion dangling in front of him, Sang-il began to waver. He looked over at Tae-chun, who was still burning the midnight oil, obsessed with the investigation. Since Tae-chun was determined to break away from Eun-young's methods and become a real prosecutor standing for true justice, Sang-il made his decision. He joined Tae-chun, officially forming a two-man special investigation team. "It's good to have you," Tae-chun said. "Their primary mission now? Find the missing lawyer Lee." And the key to finding him was following the money. The hunt for Lee was officially on. Meanwhile, Ki-suk stumbled home, completely wasted. He looked at her husband with nothing but disappointment. Knowing he had sold his soul to her father, In-ju, just for money, she couldn't help but remember her secret meeting with Eun-young earlier that day. Eun-young's target had always been In-ju. Now that Ki-suk was stripped of his power, he had become the perfect partner for Eun-young's plan. He realized that through Eun-young, she could not only seize her father's massive fortune, but, more importantly, restore the shattered pride and status of her husband. It was his only shot at a second chance. The next day, Se-hee hosted a high-ranking official from the prosecutor's office for a meal. The official thought it was just a casual family dinner, assuming Se-hee was trying to pull some strings for her husband's career. Right on cue, Se-hee received a phone call, someone reporting that In-ju had left some documents behind. Even better, the documents were related to the Singapore Investment Fund. This instantly hooked the official's curiosity. The moment Se-hee stepped away for a business matter, the official couldn't resist sneaking a peek. Inside was a roadmap of illegal short-selling trades. Of course, this was a lethal trap set by Eun-young and Se-hee, designed to ignite a fire within the prosecution and tear In-ju's organization apart from the inside. Within hours, In-ju was slapped with a travel ban, preventing him from leaving the country. Clueless about the setup, In-ju exploded with rage, taking it all out on Ki-suk. He ordered Ki-suk to use his connections and fix it immediately. Ki-suk, who once looked down on everyone from his ivory tower, was now a pathetic shell of a man being shunned by his peers. Even his former subordinates had zero respect for him now. They were ordering him around like a stray dog, telling him to go find lawyer Lee. In the world of power, once you lose your rank, you're worthless. That night, Ki-suk meticulously prepared dinner for Se-hee, which caught her by surprise. When she suggested she had met with Eun-young and hoped they could cooperate, Ki-suk felt a deep sting of humiliation. He claimed that working for In-ju was his choice, and he didn't want his wife worrying about his messes. But the next day, as he endured another round of verbal abuse from his father-in-law, that humiliation began to eat him alive. Was he really okay with becoming a second-rate fixer like lawyer Lee? To finish In-ju for good, Eun-young's faction decided to team up with Minister Sun. Before the minister's election campaign kicked off, they planned to expose the absolute truth behind Yoon's tragic passing. While the minister was willing to clear Yoon's name, he was terrified of being accused of using a tragedy for political gain. He knew that if they didn't take down the entire corrupt leadership, the truth would just be buried again. But this was only one gear in Eun-young's massive machine. What he really wanted was to rebuild BlueNet, the legendary company Yoon had founded. He was prepared to dump his entire fortune into resurrecting a dead company. He believed BlueNet's foundation was rock solid, and if he could just find the original core technicians, they could become icons of the industry once again. His only hope rested with the former research head, a man who was once the youngest PhD in Korea. But when Jun Kyung approached him, the genius scientist didn't care. He told her BlueNet was dead and buried. The groundbreaking chip technology they had developed years ago had already been patented by a massive U.S. corporation. To him, the story was over. Facing the brilliant doctor's hopelessness, Jun Kyung didn't argue. She simply placed the very last business plan her mother ever wrote into his hands and walked away. As the scientist, a man who valued time above all else, began to read the late CEO's vision, he became completely mesmerized. Even after the other technicians had stopped, he couldn't stop. He stayed back to continue the research. Meanwhile, Sang-il finally caught a break. He discovered a sudden transaction made by lawyer Lee's mistress, suggesting that the fugitive lawyer was hiding out at her place. When the two investigators arrived, a massive, intimidating guy opened the door. "We're busy, come back later," he growled. Ignoring him, Sang-il flashed his badge and forced his way inside. It turned out the big guy was one of Chairman In-ju's goons, sent to keep the woman under 24-hour surveillance. Although she hadn't spoken to lawyer Lee directly, she revealed he had sent her a secret email address before he vanished. In another part of the city, Ki-suk met with a former subordinate, only to get a brutal reality check. The once tight bond between superior and junior had evaporated the moment Ki-suk lost his badge. "You'll always be my respected senior," the officer said coldly, "so please, stop going around causing trouble." Now that he wasn't a prosecutor anymore, even his old colleagues treated him like a leper. It was a cold realization. Without power, you don't even have the right to speak. In that moment of total isolation, Ki-suk finally understood what his heart truly craved. When Eun-yong welcomed a guest to his home, it was exactly who he expected. These two former enemies were standing together once again. "My wife tells me you have a plan," Ki-suk muttered. In that single moment, Ki-suk threw away his last shred of dignity to claw back everything he had lost. On the other side, Tae-chun received an unexpected call from lawyer Lee himself. Lee's only condition for testifying was that Tae-chun, not Eun-yong, had to arrange his escape out of the country. Since Tae-chun was no longer working with his uncle, he went straight to prosecutor Ham-jin. Together, they planned a sting operation using a fake border crossing route to lure Lee out and arrest him. Everything was set, and they waited for Lee to walk into the trap. But things didn't go as planned. When Eun-yong appeared in the basement of a firm, lawyer Lee was already there waiting for him. It turned out Eun-yong, using his mole inside the prosecutor's office, had already established contact through Lee's secret email. With Eun-yong's help, Lee was hiding in an electrical distribution room. When Lee asked if everything was okay with his partner, Eun-yong replied coldly, "Tae-chun is no longer on my side." Tae-chun's operation was a total bust, especially after Eun-yong arranged for the mole's entire family to be safely moved out of the country. Then came the main event. At Minister Sun's press conference, Jun Kyung stepped into the spotlight once again. She revealed the absolute truth behind her mother's death to the entire world. But the real shocker? Ki-suk was right there with her, appearing as her accomplice turned whistleblower. In front of the flashing cameras, Ki-suk put on a heartbreaking performance, offering a public apology to Yoon. Watching this on TV, In-ju was shaking with pure rage, and the hits kept coming. Lawyer Lee appeared via live feed, detailing every single one of In-ju's crimes for the media. Lee claimed his only condition for surrendering was that Ki-suk, the man he called honorable, handle the investigation. Ki-suk vowed to fight until the end to build a glorious, incorruptible prosecution. Tae-chun eventually confronted his uncle. Eun-yong didn't hide his hand. "I'm going to use Ki-suk to sweep them all away." Under Eun-yong's orchestration, Ki-suk had officially joined their faction, rebranding himself as an anti-corruption hero. Facing the press, Ki-suk dropped the ultimate lie. He claimed he had finally secured In-ju's criminal ledger. That one sentence sent the media and the criminal underworld into a total frenzy. When faced with Jun Kyung's questioning, Ki-suk remained the picture of composure. This was his signature move, fabricating evidence early on so he could lead public opinion exactly where he wanted it to go. Eun-yong had chosen Ki-suk for exactly this reason. The man was a master manipulator. But even as Ki-suk played his part, Eun-yong kept the pressure on, constantly reminding his new junior partner who the real boss was. This left Ki-suk boiling with a rage he didn't dare show. Meanwhile, In-ju took a desperate turn and kidnapped lawyer Lee's girlfriend. In-ju was never one for mercy when it came to traitors. Just as the woman was about to be harmed, she remembered a number Lee had given her. When the phone rang and In-ju picked up, he realized he'd been played. It wasn't Sudong on the other end, it was the prosecutor. Now, she was officially a key witness for the state. Tae-chun warned In-ju that they had the call recorded and could arrest him on the spot. "I'm sure you're busy," Tae-chun mocked, "so I won't bother you anymore." Everything was moving exactly as the prosecution had planned. The high-ranking officials tied to In-ju were staring down a massive, unavoidable crisis. The next day, at a meeting for the GM company victims, Jun Kyung made it clear. A standard lawsuit would only result in peanuts for compensation. She argued that the only smart move was to keep the company running and restore the stock's value. But the head scientist was skeptical of any investment firm, claiming they were all snakes in the same pit who would do anything for money. That's when Eun Yong took the stage. He stood before the crowd and admitted it. I am a merchant. My only goal is profit. Greed isn't a virtue, and I'm certainly no saint. But then he dropped the kicker. The difference between him and Inju was that he refused to tolerate corruption or illegal acts. He promised to make his profit within the boundaries of the law. I will be the tainted merchant who helps you reclaim your losses, he vowed. I will resurrect the company Inju destroyed so that everyone wins. The room erupted in thunderous applause. Even the scientists sought out Jun Kyung after the meeting, expressing his desire to rejoin the new BlueNet and focus entirely on R&D. That night, Ki-suk and his old team gathered at Eun Yong's luxury penthouse. When Ki-suk announced his plan to purge every single corrupt official at the top, the younger prosecutors fell into a tense silence. They were just small fish in the system. Launching a rebellion against the elite was a suicide mission. Our dear prosecutors are gathered here today, Ki-suk challenged. So where exactly do you stand? The next morning, Eun Yong woke up with a massive hangover. He had a meeting with the head of the development department, but as he set off, he realized he was being shadowed. It was Inju's thugs. They followed him into a parking garage, but when they got out of their cars, Eun Yong was gone. Suddenly, the heavy iron shutters began to roll up. Our dear chairman, why do you never disappoint me? Eun Yong's voice echoed. In a flash, Eun Yong's elite security team appeared and completely neutralized Inju's goons. At the same time, Ki-suk stood before a sea of cameras and announced that Hwanjong was officially surrendering. Jun Kyung then dropped a bombshell. She released hard evidence of massive corruption within the highest ranks of the prosecutor's office. As the camera flashes blinded the room, a wave of junior prosecutors stepped forward. An all-out civil war from the bottom up had officially ignited within the prosecution. Faced with the crushing pressure of the movement led by Ki-suk and backed by Eun Yong's resources, the prosecutor general was forced to submit. Ki-suk was officially reinstated as the chief of the Special Investigations Unit. Congratulations on your return, Chief Ki-suk, the staff cheered. Just like that, Ki-suk was back at the absolute peak of power. Seeing his chance, Sudong immediately tried to pull Tae-chun over to their side, promising exclusive intel that would make him a star. But this only made Tae-chun furious. Even Jun Kyung suggested he should take the deal, which left Tae-chun feeling more disappointed than ever. To him, it seemed his mentor had truly crossed over to the dark side. Justice obtained through dirty tricks wasn't justice at all, and it certainly wasn't what Tae-chun was fighting for. The next day, Tae-chun handed over a mountain of evidence, a full investigation file targeting Ki-suk himself. The files were so incredibly thorough that even Ki-suk had to admit they were impressive. Your professional skills have definitely improved, Ki-suk sneered. But why are you so bad at reading the room? Tae-chun was officially drawing a line in the sand, separating himself from Ki-suk's corruption. Before long, Ki-suk's former underlings were being hauled off in handcuffs. The old guard of the prosecution wasn't safe either. High-ranking leaders of the Supreme Prosecutor's Office were caught in the net one by one. With every new arrest, Chairman Inju's list of crimes grew longer. The era of Inju was officially over. With Eun Yong's massive backing, Minister Sun cruised to victory in the neutral district election. Ki-suk even earned the prestigious title of National Prosecutor. On the surface, Eun Yong was giving him everything. Jun Kyung asked, "Are you really just going to let a lowlife like Ki-suk enjoy the success?" Eun Yong replied that now that he had elevated Ki-suk to the top, he wanted to see the man's ultimate goal. As for his nephew, Tae-chun, Eun Yong wasn't sure if the boy could hold out until the end, but he used a metaphor from Mongolian chess. When the weakest pawn finally enters enemy territory, it becomes the most powerful piece on the board. Whether Tae-chun could survive this brutal survival of the fittest was entirely up to him. The next day, Tae-chun got a tip from Sister Kim in Dongdaemun. After Inju's arrest, the old man had convinced her to sue him with a promise to return her shares. But instead, Inju betrayed her again, having Ki-suk sue her for defamation. This made Tae-chun think back to the night Inju was summoned, the same night Changhyun supposedly committed suicide. He began to suspect that Changhyun's death wasn't a leap of despair as the media reported. Even though there was no direct evidence and the CCTV footage was useless, Tae-chun had a new idea. Dashcams. Sang-il quickly found a clip showing Lawyer Lee at the crime scene, but it still wasn't enough to prove a murder. "If there's no evidence, we create it," Tae-chun said. It was a classic Ki-suk move, showing just how fast the young prosecutor was learning to play the game. Facing Tae-chun's murder accusations, would Lawyer Lee finally break? Meanwhile, Eun Yong was hit with a crisis. His assistant, Hanna, had suddenly gone missing. Then, a call from Jun Kyung confirmed the worst. The special task force had illegally arrested Representative Hong. Ki-suk's betrayal had officially begun. Ki-suk showed up at Eun-young's residence with a swarm of investigators, declaring a full-blown corruption probe. Eun-young was in the crosshairs, and the situation looked dire. But this was all part of Eun-young's master plan. In-ju had paid the price for Ki-suk's greed, and now it was Ki-suk's turn to pay for his own. As the investigators hauled away every single one of Eun-young's files, Ki-suk sat across from him, oozing arrogance. He didn't just have In-ju's massive fortune now. He held absolute, unchecked power in the palm of his hand. From that moment on, Ki-suk stopped seeing Eun-young as a partner and started treating him like a nuisance. With a voice dripping with arrogance, Ki-suk demanded that Eun-young pack his bags and leave South Korea immediately. But Eun-young didn't flinch. He flatly refused, making it clear that he wasn't going anywhere. Not now, not ever. Years ago, he had made the mistake of retreating, and he had spent every day since living with the soul-crushing regret of that surrender. This time, Eun-young was determined to fight to the bitter end, even if it meant taking on the entire corrupt establishment alone. His defiance sent Ki-suk into a blind rage. Ki-suk immediately pivoted to a scorched earth policy. He ordered his men to fabricate evidence and launch a full-scale investigation into everyone close to Eun-young, specifically targeting Han-na, Eun-young's most trusted right hand. Not only did Ki-suk forge documents accusing her of being an accomplice in the plot to harm Chong-hyun, but he also froze every single one of her assets. His intention was crystal clear. He wanted to systematically dismantle Eun-young's power until there was nothing left. When Jun-kyung went to visit Han-na, she found that the woman wasn't even worried about her own legal trouble. Her only concern was the massive project they were building in Mongolia. That project was the life's work she had built alongside Eun-young. Even under the crushing weight of a federal investigation, Han-na remained unervingly calm. To her, this was a small price to pay for the loyalty and kindness Eun-young had shown her over the years. She sent a defiant message back. "Tell Eun-young not to worry. I'll make sure he has everything he needs to finish this." Eun-young knew Han-na's heart. She was fierce, loyal, and ready to sacrifice everything for him. Because of that, he knew he had to strike fast and hard on the outside to ensure she didn't suffer a second longer. Meanwhile, Tae-chun's investigation hit a massive anomaly. He discovered that there was no record of a fingerprint analysis ever being conducted on Chong-hyun's suicide note. In a high-profile case like that, such an omission was absolutely impossible. As he followed the paper trail, he realized the man who had personally signed off on the case was Lawyer Lee. But as a veteran of the prosecution himself, Lawyer Lee was a master of the game. He was tight-lipped and didn't leave a trail. Tae-chun knew his evidence wasn't strong enough to break a man like Lee just yet. He had to wait for the perfect moment. But Eun-young didn't need paper files. With his superhuman memory and freakish ability to process numbers, he had every single detail of Ki-suk's corruption burned into his mind. He realized that the way Ki-suk was treating Han-na was a carbon copy of how he had destroyed Yoon years ago. Out of all the people who had conspired to hurt Yoon, only one man remained unpunished: Ki-suk. At this point, Jun-kyung handed over a mountain of evidence that Eun-young had secretly gathered to Tae-chun. Among the files was proof that Lawyer Lee had once illegally allowed Eun-young to slip out of prison to meet with In-ju. That one detail was enough to bury Lawyer Lee for good. But there was a major problem. Ki-suk had already seized all the original physical documents. Tae-chun knew Ki-suk would incinerate that evidence the moment he got the chance. The only way to stop him was to hit him with a search warrant immediately, even if it meant a direct, head-on collision with the man who held all the cards. It didn't take long for the confrontation to happen. Tae-chun walked right up to Ki-suk, served him the search warrant, and demanded that he comply. He argued that if Ki-suk really had nothing to hide and had solid evidence against Eun-young, he shouldn't fear a standard inspection. But in that tense moment, Tae-chun saw Lawyer Lee being led away by Ki-suk's men. It was a cleanup operation. Ki-suk was erasing every witness. He looked at Tae-chun and mocked him with a cold smirk. He asked how it felt to be investigating his own uncle's criminal fund, then arrogantly declared that he would search warrant his own way, on his own time. Despite the threats and the crushing pressure of the system, Tae-chun didn't take a single step back. The justice he believed in had finally given him the strength to stand against the monster, knowing full well it might cost him his career or his life. Meanwhile, Jun-kyung went back to see Eun-young, finding him sitting there, eerily calm, as if he were simply waiting for the next move in a game of chess. Deep within the gathering storm, both Eun-young and Jun-kyung knew the wheels of their final counterattack were finally turning in the right direction. Chairman In-ju, bitter from his crushing defeat, refused to accept a loss at the hands of his own daughter and son-in-law. Once the king of the underworld, he was now nothing but a man with a shattered ego. Exactly as Eun-young predicted, In-ju reached out to his daughter, Se-hee, promising to hand over his entire secret fortune if she could secure his release on medical bail. He believed that, with his freedom, he could rebuild his empire from scratch. At the same time, Eun-young paid a visit to Lawyer Lee. With cold, calculated precision, he told Lee to bring a message to Inju. A deal was on the table, the kind of deal that no greedy man could ever turn down. Driven by pure avarice, Inju walked straight into the trap. After promising his assets to his daughter, he was granted medical bail. But the moment he stepped into the hospital parking garage, Eun-yong and his men were already there, waiting in the shadows. Terrified, Se-hee screamed, demanding to know what Eun-yong was doing. Eun-yong just looked at her, calm as ever, and said he was simply taking her father out for some fresh air. He offered a chilling reminder. If she even thought about calling the police, the hospital's CCTV footage would prove that she was the one who helped her father escape. Inju assumed Eun-yong wanted to partner up for mutual profit. He thought this was about business, not blood. But he failed to realize that for Eun-yong, money was just a tool. Life, death, and honor were the only debts he was interested in collecting. Before long, Ki-suk received a panicked call from his wife. He snarled into the phone, furious that she was interrupting him at such a critical moment. But the power had already shifted. If the public found out his wife had helped a key witness escape, Ki-suk's career would be incinerated in seconds. Eun-yong took the phone, his voice steady and threatening. He didn't want to negotiate, he wanted Ki-suk on his knees. To Ki-suk's horror, the old fox Inju had already flipped. In exchange for the massive benefits Eun-yong promised, Inju sat down with the Incheon prosecution and confessed every single one of his son-in-law's crimes. Within hours, that testimony was handed over to Tae-chun, who was now staring down lawyer Lee, Ki-suk's last loyal soldier. Tae-chun didn't pull any punches. He asked Lee, "Are you really willing to die for Ki-suk?" He made Lee realize the brutal truth. To save his own skin, Ki-suk would turn Lee into the next suicide victim, just like he did with Chang-hyun. Realizing he was the next lamb to the slaughter, Lee broke. He confessed everything, revealing that Ki-suk was the one who ordered Inju's illegal release from prison. The dog-eat-dog finale had arrived. With lawyer Lee's testimony, the truth behind Chang-hyun's murder was finally dragged into the light. Ki-suk's world collapsed. Every hidden sin, every bribe, and every body buried in the shadows was exposed to the world. As for Eun-yong, his long walk of vengeance had finally come to an end. He chose to leave the noise and the blood behind, returning to the vast Mongolian plains where his journey first began. It was the only place left where he could find true peace. The world continues to spin, and while the storm has passed, the cycle of power and greed will never truly end. That brings us to the end of our story. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.